What if Saint Augustine and Friedrich Nietzsche clashed in a debate about God? Faith versus reason. Eternity versus the present. Two minds. One timeless question. This is the result. Does God exist? This is one of humanity's oldest and most profound questions. One that transcends eras, shapes cultures, and challenges both faith and reason. Today, we won't just explore ideas. We'll witness a clash between two titans of human thought whose views on this question are as different as the heavens and the abyss. On one side, Saint Augustine, a man who lived intensely, diving into worldly pleasures and doubts until he found absolute truth and faith in God. One of Christianity's greatest defenders, he argues that God is not only real but essential for the existence of everything good, beautiful, and true. On the other side, Friedrich Nietzsche, the philosopher who boldly proclaimed, God is dead. For Nietzsche, the idea of God is a human invention, a construct that limits humanity's freedom and greatness. He seeks no solace in the transcendent. Instead, he demands that we create our own meaning in this world. Today, these two intellectual giants, separated by centuries, confront their ideas in a timeless dialogue. Prepare yourself to reflect, question, and perhaps even transform. Because ultimately, the question is not just whether God exists, but what the answer means to each of us. Gentlemen, the stage is yours.
When we look at the universe, we are confronted by a majestic order, a harmony that transcends human understanding. The stars follow precise paths, the seas know their boundaries, and even the human heart beats in a steady rhythm. This order cannot be the product of chance. Behind every effect, there must be a cause, and that cause can only be God, the eternal creator, the source of all existence.
You speak of the universe's order as if it were some divine miracle, but that's merely an interpretation. Humanity looks at chaos and projects order because it cannot endure uncertainty. There is no why to the universe, just as there is no need for a creator. Your idea of God explains nothing. It merely shifts the mystery onto an invisible entity.
Nietzsche. Your perspective overlooks the most fundamental reasoning. What is the universe without an ordering principle? Without God, everything would be absurd and void. The very existence of natural laws points to a higher intelligence. Who but God could create something so magnificent and functional?
Functionality, magnificence. You speak like someone seeking comfort, Augustine. Science reveals that the so-called natural laws are the result of blind, indifferent processes that care nothing for our existence. The idea that someone created them is a reflection of our fear of the unknown. God is not an explanation. He's an escape, a fiction crafted to fill the void.
And yet, even with all the scientific explanations, you cannot escape the essential question. Where does the universe come from? Something cannot come from nothing. God is the first cause, the necessary foundation for the existence of anything.
This need for a first cause is a logical contrivance. We invented the concept of causality to make sense of what we don't understand. But what if the universe simply is? What if it needs no beginning, no reason, no meaning? Your first cause is just a way to avoid the abyss of the unknown.
If the universe simply is, as you suggest, then what is the purpose of our existence? Without God, life is devoid of meaning. The very fact that we seek purpose points to a higher origin. It is inconceivable that something as profound and universal as this desire is merely an illusion.
Purpose is a human invention. We create meaning to survive because the bare truth that the universe is indifferent to us terrifies us. You call it a profound desire. I call it weakness. The man who faces the universe without God is the one who is finally free to create his own purpose.
And what guarantees that these self-made purposes are anything more than fleeting whims? Without God, any idea of purpose is volatile, subjective, and incapable of sustaining a truly meaningful life. Only in God do we find something eternal, something beyond our limitations.
Eternity, Augustine, there lies your ultimate escape, infinity. You speak of something we cannot conceive, cannot prove, yet conveniently use to justify your belief. Infinity is not proof of God. It is a void you fill with your faith.
Infinity is not a void, Nietzsche. It is the foundation of everything. God is infinite in his perfection, and it is this perfection that sustains the order of the universe. Human reason is limited, but inevitably points to something greater, something that transcends what we can comprehend.
You confuse your inability to comprehend with the existence of something transcendent. This is something greater you invoke is merely a reflection of your own limitations. Instead of embracing infinity as a mystery, you reduce it to a religious formula that keeps you tethered.
I am not tethered, Nietzsche. I am grounded. And you, in rejecting God, are left adrift in the void. What remains but despair? How can man endure insignificance without God?
Man endures insignificance by embracing it, Augustine. He doesn't need a God to feel whole. He only needs the courage to live without illusions, creating his own greatness amidst the chaos.
On one side, divine order. On the other, the freedom to create meaning. But how do these views impact our morality?
Morality cannot exist without God. He is the ultimate source of goodness, the absolute standard that allows us to distinguish right from wrong. Without God, everything becomes relative, subject to human whims. That's why the scriptures guide us. They not only reflect God's will, but also protect humanity from its own corruption.
Augustine, here lies the central flaw of your divine morality. It isn't an absolute truth, but an invention by those seeking power over others. Religious morality is a tool of control, crafted to subjugate the strong and glorify the weak. True morality is what man creates for himself, free from the chains of faith.
If each man creates his own morality, as you suggest, the inevitable result is chaos. Selfishness prevails and society disintegrates. Without God, there is no justice, only human will. And we know where that leads, to tyranny.
Tyranny? No, Augustine. The real tyranny is the imposition of a universal moral code based on a God no one can prove. The morality you defend denies life, represses instincts, and turns man into a servant of unrealistic ideals. It is the morality of the weak, not the free.
So you advocate moral anarchy, a complete rejection of objective standards? History is filled with examples of tragedies arising when man disregards divine law. Think of wars, genocides. These atrocities were enabled by the rejection of God.
And how many wars, how many genocides were committed in God's name? Religious morality hasn't brought peace but division. Crusades, inquisitions, persecutions, are these the fruits of your moral God? No, Augustine. It's not God that brings order. It's man's courage to face his freedom and create his own values.
You speak of freedom, Nietzsche, but without God, what stops man from surrendering to his darkest impulses? Divine morality isn't a burden, it's a protection, a guide that elevates us above our disordered passions.
And what you call elevation, I call repression. Divine morality teaches man to be ashamed of his desires, to fear his own strength. My Superman rejects this guilt. He embraces his nature and creates his own values, not to please an imaginary God, but to live fully.
And what is the Superman if not an idol born of human pride? You believe man can be his own God, but that is just another form of idolatry. Without God, man is a slave to himself, to his desires and his limited understanding.
A slave to himself? No, Augustine. A slave is the one who lives to please an invisible God, obeying commandments that deny his essence. You call that freedom. I call it servitude. The truly free man creates his own values, grounded in his will and strength.
But those values, Nietzsche, are not eternal. They change with time and circumstance. Only in God do we find a moral foundation that transcends the ages, that consistently guides humanity. Without him, everything is ephemeral.
And why should they be eternal? Life is change, flux, constant creation. The quest for eternity is an escape. The man who creates his own values doesn't need the illusion of the eternal. He lives in the present, affirming his existence without fear of the future.
And that is precisely why your vision is dangerous. Without God, morality becomes a game of convenience, a way for man to justify his own interests. True morality calls us to something greater, to sacrifice our ego for the sake of the common good.
This sacrifice is nothing more than an excuse for weakness. The morality I advocate is not for everyone. It is for the strong, for those with the courage to live without excuses and without spiritual crutches. Without the freedom to create our values, we are slaves to a God that exists only in our minds.
And without God, we are slaves to our disordered desires, incapable of distinguishing what is good from what is merely convenient. Morality without God is a fragile construct, one that collapses at the first storm of human selfishness.
God is the eternal foundation, or human freedom as the creative force. How do these visions shape the meaning of life and death?
The human heart is restless until it finds rest in God. It's no coincidence that we seek something greater, something eternal. This longing for transcendence, for lasting meaning, cannot be ignored. It is proof that we were made for something beyond this fleeting life. In God, we find a purpose that neither suffering nor death can take away.
This longing for transcendence, Augustine, is not proof of God, it's proof of human weakness. Man fears the void, the finite, and invents the eternal to comfort himself. Life needs nothing beyond itself to have meaning. Find significance in the present, not in promises of another world.
But how can the present suffice, Nietzsche, when we know that everything around us is ephemeral? Death is inevitable. If everything ends there, what remains? What value does love, virtue, or sacrifice have if there is nothing beyond this limited existence?
The value, Augustine, lies not in something beyond life, but in life itself. Each moment is unique because it is finite. We don't need eternity for life to have meaning. We need only the courage to live fully without illusions. Accepting the end is what makes every instant precious.
This finitude you exalt brings neither comfort nor hope. On the contrary, it reduces everything to absurdity. Pain and suffering lose all purpose. Only the promise of eternity in God gives meaning to our sacrifices and struggles in this life.
Purpose in sacrifice? That's what religion preaches to keep the masses submissive. Life is meant to be lived, not suffered in the name of a supposed eternal reward. Suffering doesn't need purpose. It is a fact, an opportunity to grow, not to kneel.
And grow for what, Nietzsche? For the void? Your philosophy turns suffering into an endless cycle of pain without redemption. God doesn't just give purpose to pain. He promises renewal, a new beginning. Without that, what do you offer besides resignation?
I offer the eternal return, Augustine. Imagine that the life you live now must be lived again infinitely, exactly as it is. There is no redemption, no escape. The true challenge is to live in such a way that you desire each moment to repeat eternally. That is the meaning, to create a life worth living without relying on illusions.
And what you call the eternal return is nothing but despair. It cannot provide true meaning, for the very cycle of endless repetitions lacks purpose. The resurrection God offers, on the other hand, is the fullness of meaning. It is the promise of a renewed life in communion with the Creator.
Resurrection, renewal, all of that is a denial of life as it is. You would rather cling to an imagined future than face reality. I do not reject life. I affirm it with all its pain and imperfections. I don't need promises of another world to find meaning in this one.
But what kind of affirmation is this, Nietzsche, that ignores the universal cry for something more? The search for eternity is not weakness. It is the mark of our creation for transcendence. God gave us this restlessness so we wouldn't settle for the finite but aspire to the infinite.
And I say that the infinite is a dangerous illusion. It causes man to reject earthly life in favor of a fantasy. Human greatness lies in embracing the now, in creating one's own eternity in this moment, rather than waiting for one that will never come.
This eternity you try to build with your own hands is made of sand. Only God can offer something that will not be destroyed by time. Death is defeated by the resurrection in Christ. In that victory, we find the ultimate meaning of life.
Death does not need to be defeated, Augustine. It is part of life, and facing it without fear is what makes us truly free. While you wait for resurrection, I celebrate finitude. It teaches us that every moment matters, that there is no time to waste on vain hopes.
And that celebration, Nietzsche, is nothing more than empty consolation. Without God, every moment, no matter how beautiful, is ultimately crushed by death. Only in God do we find a meaning that is not destroyed by the end.
The end does not destroy, Augustine. It transforms. It calls us to action, to creation, to the affirmation of life in all its intensity. The eternity you promise is a refuge that weakens life, with all its limitations, is enough for those who have the courage to live it.
Eternity or absolute presence. How do these visions shape our relationship with suffering?
Suffering is, without a doubt, one of the greatest challenges we face in life. But it is not without purpose. It is a consequence of sin, of humanity's choice to turn away from God. Yet, even in pain, we find a path to redemption. God uses suffering to teach us, to purify us, to bring us back to what is true and eternal.
You turn suffering into a tool of control, Augustine. Your explanation is nothing more than an attempt to justify pain with the promise of a divine purpose. Suffering doesn't need a purpose. It is an inevitable fact of life. Instead of seeking solace in myths, we must face it, embrace it, and grow through it.
And without purpose, Nietzsche's suffering becomes unbearable. How can you face pain and evil without any hope for something greater? The promise of redemption is not a means of control, but a source of strength. God doesn't just allow suffering. He walks with us through it, offering meaning even in the darkest moments.
Meaning? No, Augustine. The meaning you offer is a lie for the weak. Suffering doesn't require external meaning. It simply is. In pain, we discover our true strength because it challenges us to overcome, to become something greater without relying on comforting fantasies.
And what you call strength. Nietzsche is nothing but resignation. Without God, pain is just pain. Without redemption, without justice, without an end. Faith transforms suffering into an opportunity for spiritual growth, to draw closer to God and to an eternal purpose.
Resignation? Number. What I propose is courage. Your redemption turns suffering into a virtue, but that virtue is servile. I say we must accept pain as part of life, not as a means to please an imaginary God. We don't need redemption, we need action.
But action for what, Nietzsche? Without God, there is no justice for those who suffer unjustly, no reward for those who endure. The Christian faith doesn't just offer consolation. It promises that evil will be defeated and pain will be transformed into joy.
Consolation is a lie, Augustine. It prolongs torment by making us wait for something that will never come. Hope is the worst of evils because it distracts us from the present, from the strength we can find within ourselves. Instead of waiting, we must act, live intensely, and accept life in all its harshness.
And this rejection of hope, Nietzsche, is what condemns your philosophy to despair. God offers us a hope that is not illusory, but real. We are not alone in our pain, nor abandoned to evil. Your absence of faith cannot console or sustain those who face the deepest suffering.
I do not offer consolation, Augustine, because consolation is a form of weakness. Suffering must be faced head-on without illusory hopes. It is in pain that we discover ourselves, that we become stronger, not because a God helps us, but because we are capable of enduring on our own.
And what of those who cannot endure, Nietzsche? Do you abandon them to the void? God does not abandon anyone. He offers everyone the possibility of redemption, of a love that transforms even the most unbearable pain into something meaningful.
And that is exactly what I reject. This love is a chain that binds us to weakness. Instead of teaching us to overcome, it makes us wait passively for salvation. Life is not meant for waiting. It is meant to be lived in all its rawness and beauty.
Nietzsche. Your rejection of hope and the love of God may seem like courage, but at its core, it is despair. Without God, suffering is nothing but pain and emptiness. With Him, even evil can be transformed into redemption and purpose.
And you, Augustine, see redemption where there is only weakness. Your hope doesn't transform, it delays the acceptance of what is. Suffering doesn't need purpose to be faced. It is the force that forges us, not the chain that binds us to illusion.
A life without God is a walk in darkness, Nietzsche. But I tell you, the light of faith is not an illusion. It is the truth that gives meaning to the journey, even in the midst of pain.
And I tell you, Augustine, the true light is within us. We do not need God to walk. We need only the courage to accept life as it is in all its beauty and pain.
We have reached the end of this epic encounter between two of history's most influential minds. Saint Augustine and Friedrich Nietzsche diverged on nearly everything, yet each in their own way offered us profound insights into the human condition. Augustine showed us the hope of a morality anchored in God, one that gives meaning to suffering and points to a transformative eternity. Nietzsche, on the other hand, challenged every certainty, calling us to embrace life in all its intensity and to create our own values. But perhaps the greatest lesson of this debate is that, whether in the search for transcendence or in the affirmation of the present, both challenge us to reflect on what truly gives us strength and purpose. The final question is not just about God, but about how we confront our own existence. And now the reflection turns to you. Which vision resonates more with your life? Do you find meaning in Augustine's faith or in Nietzsche's freedom? Write in the comments, Augustine or Nietzsche, and tell us how you confront suffering and seek meaning in your own life. If this debate made you reflect, like this video and subscribe to the channel to keep exploring the greatest ideas in history. What was the argument that impacted you the most today? Comment below. And don't forget to suggest the next debate. Your suggestions help us grow and create even more fascinating dialogues. In the end, perhaps it's not just about believing or not believing in God. It's about how we face pain, seek meaning, and build a legacy. Augustine reminds us that faith can transform even the greatest pains into redemption. Nietzsche, on the other hand, challenges us to live each moment as if it were eternal, without waiting for something beyond this life. And you, are you ready for this journey? See you in the next episode of The Great Debates, where history's greatest minds continue to challenge our ideas and illuminate the present.